All right, hello, and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year we have so many awesome sessions for writers, writing professionals in the publishing industry. Today, what we're going to hear about is Which Way to Your Heart? Paranormal Romance Masterclass. And I've already told the panelists that I expect a lot of puns, and I'm not very good at them. So let's see if they deliver, in addition to providing us a ton of fantastic information on writing paranormal romance. Let me introduce you to our incredible panelists. First, we have R.M. Virtues. R.M. is a best-selling author of romantasy and paranormal romance, a self-proclaimed son of the old gods. R.M.'s work is filled with mythology, fairy tales, and folklore. He is Afro-Indigenous, Two-Spirit, and currently resides as a guest on the Southern Paiute lands. When not writing, RM can be found watching horror movies, playing fantasy video games, or falling down the research rabbit hole. I think a lot of us do that. So we've got a lot of friends here. Let's go on to Leanna Renee Hieber. Leanna is an actress, playwright, ghost tour guide, and the award-winning best-selling author of gothic gas lamp fantasy novels, including Strangely Beautiful, Magic Most Foul, The Eternophiles, the Spectral City series, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghost, which is co-authored with Andrea James, which examines women's history through ghost stories, and was a Bram Stoker award-winning finalist for Superior Achievement in Nonfiction. When do you have time to sleep is the question there. She is also the author and audiobook narrator for several speculative fiction series, and a 4-time Prism Award winner and other award-winning finalists. Her books have been selected for National Book Club editions, as well as translated into many languages. I'm going to ask her to tell us more about that. And we do know, those of you who are watching, the book that is behind her is her nonfiction, but she absolutely has the paranormal romance chops. And it is a long list, I'll tell you. All right, let's go. Britta Threshie. Britta's here. She writes as B.L. Brown. You'll see her there. Britta publishes urban fantasy and paranormal romance. Her debut novella, Shady Depths, was released in April 2023, followed by Ritual Income in October of the same year, and Stitching Palms this past March. And I actually see Ritual Income on Twitter, it's not Twitter anymore, it's Threads, actually, I avoid Twitter. Gorgeous cover there. Her short fiction can be found in the monster romance anthology Tales, Trysts, and Tentacles, One Monstrous Summer, the horror anthology Fireside, Modern Legends and Lore, and The Future of Us, a Moms Who Write anthology. Outside of writing, she is a human-wrangling musical theater nerd and beer-loving runner with a passion for fairy tales and folklore. She can be found under a pile of digital literature or begging her academic friends for their JSTOR logins. I think Britta and RM would have a great time researching, is what I'll say.
Oh, yeah.
Next up, we have Robin Alvarez. Robin is the author of the #1 new release YA ethnic fairy tale, When Oceans Rise. She is the editor and author of Owl Crate's upcoming anthologies. Emotive characters, monsters, and multiracial perspectives are the hallmarks of her work. While she spent the majority of her life in beach towns, having almost drowned several times, yikes, she currently resides in the desert, where waters are less likely to kill her. Thank goodness. Robin's work has been featured on Epic Reads, the New Orleans Review, Owl Crate, ABC, NBC, and CBS News affiliates. And last but 100% not least, we have Mariah Stillbrook. Mariah, originally from Iowa, she lives in Colorado with her white German Shepherd, husband, and little girl. I like the line there that the pet was first. She graduated from the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. She spends most of her days writing, researching, and enjoying the occasional hike. In her late 20s, she realized her writing was missing something, magic. And now she focuses her writing on horror and urban fantasy in both the adult and young adult genres. Thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to just jump right in. And perhaps this is a silly question, but maybe not. We want to assume somebody who's here has no idea. What is a paranormal romance? Somebody tell me, what is a paranormal romance?
It's got to be about the percentages. It has to have a percentage of romance that is higher than the other world building within the book. So that's usually how all of these genres break down, because a lot of times when we're talking about a a subject like paranormal romance, you have it already is a cross genre title. You already have you have something fantastical, and then you have romance as a core element. So the percentages for it to be a paranormal romance, the world building has to be paranormal and the romance has to be at the core. So if those percentages match in like at least a 50-50 or a 60-40 quality, then good, you're in a paranormal romance. If your romance quotient is a lot less, then you're probably in a category of maybe science fiction or fantasy, or a paranormal novel with romantic elements rather than it being actual paranormal romance.
Okay, so does the romance really needs to be a big push on the plot? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I really like the percentages. I've not heard that before. I think that's really helpful. Because there are always a lot of questions about that. Is this paranormal romance? Is it contemporary fantasy? Is it just paranormal? So
Right.
that's really helpful. Does anyone else have any other definitions of what sort of makes paranormal romance?
I would say that's a good summary. I've always just thought about it as it's a paranormal story built around a romance as opposed to a romance or a love story placed inside of a paranormal plot line. The world building really has to focus around the couple. And the paranormal elements as well should be kind of chosen or decided upon based on what you are trying to, like the story you're trying to tell for the couple, because they still have to be central.
So, question on that. So, I hear this a lot, particularly on the internet right now, when we're talking about what is romantasy versus romantic fantasy versus fantasy romance. So, what you just said there, RM, that it's a romance in a paranormal world versus a paranormal world surrounded by a romance. I want to make sure tell me if this is right or wrong. I have a romance story, happens to be with paranormal people. Does that make it a paranormal romance? Or does it need to be focused on, I've got my vampires are really important, but if I took away the paranormal part, it's still a romance. Is this how this convention works? Sorry.
I would say so. I would agree that would be a paranormal romance. Because if it's still a romance when you take away the paranormal aspects, then yeah, that's kind of important, right? Like it still has to be a romance at its core, as opposed to you're building a romance around a paranormal plot line, or that's like the core of it, whatever the conflict or main plot point is, it has to involve the couple first and foremost.
Okay.
As opposed to like just, having the characters go through a haunting or whatever and they happen to end up together at the end. I'm not really going to feel like, oh, I was reading a romance. It just happened to have a happy ending, or, you know what I mean, like a romantic ending, as opposed to I'm watching this couple work on their relationship while going through a haunting. That feels a little bit different.
Okay.
Robin, to piggyback on that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was going to piggyback on RM too.
We're with it.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, something that had always clicked for me as far as the difference between like a paranormal romance and then like, two characters just kind of going through fantasy like elements is one of those love interests actually being some kind of paranormal something, because then you're really getting into like the dire stakes of their worlds being so different, and the fact that when you say yes to one of those relationships, you can never go back to normal. And so those are really high stakes, and what makes paranormal romance so enthralling each time.
Is that a convention that we would consider? And Mariah, I saw you nodding, so I'm gonna call
I 100% agree with everything everyone said. I really like what Robin just said too about, one of the characters being paranormal. That just adds that more mystery and intrigue, which is romantic, right? So I just love the way that she said that.
Is that a convention? Would we consider paranormal romances? Does at least one of the love interests need to be paranormal, or can there be a paranormal story, paranormal romance in a paranormal world, and they both happen to be human, or whatever the main species is? Leanna.
I think
more often than not, like a lot of times, like it's as long as there is a romance, how what kind of being the romance is, and how they identify in it. All of that is immaterial. What's important is that there are two people who get together. That's whatever they are. And what Robin was saying about that adds another high stakes element. Absolutely. You have to have a high stakes element for what is the conflict of these two people getting together, because the ultimate goal of a romance are two people getting together, and there's got to be conflict along the way, otherwise you don't have a story. So, but it doesn't have to be that it's a paranormal entity. It's just that is sort of a subgenre. You've got monster romance and stuff like that, and that you have there are subgenres within paranormal romance, which is already a subgenre of romance. So, and that is one wonderful option, but it does not have to be that one of the characters is paranormal, but
And
something
RM,
in the world has to be, for sure.
and RM, I think you
Yeah,
were
I would say, because if it's not paranormal, the world, then you're just writing a contemporary
Right.
romance without those elements.
So I think Robin may have already pinged onto this and got into my next question, which is good. I'm going to ask Britta, if you don't mind. So how does a romance story change? I mean, I think Robin just told us there may be higher stakes when there is when one of the characters is paranormal. So how does a romance story change when we add the paranormal aspect to it?
I mean, I would say the stakes is probably one of, to me, the more obvious aspects of it, because even in paranormal cozy romance, I just read one where I was a human student and a vampire. There was this idea of the mating, and that's like a serious stake, even in a cozy romance with like general low stakes around it, because these two characters have to decide, like, if we're going to do this, we are in it for the long haul. And I think your normal reader's like, oh, commitment is a stake. And in contemporary romance, it's a contemporary world, and we can kind of compartmentalize that stake is, yes, it's important, but it's not like a soul binding, it's not a fated mate situation. And that's, if you acknowledge that and accept it, you're in for the long haul. So even in the cozy space, and then when you take it out of cozy into witches and werewolves and vampires and, you know, vampire gangs at war, generally the paranormal world is a riskier place to be, especially for the human main character. So it's a ramp up of the adrenaline of the storytelling, I feel.
And I want to say real quick, I should have said it earlier when Robin, I do appreciate that we have said stakes a lot. I know we were using it as a real word, but I did say I wanted puns. And so, Britta, when you started talking about stakes, I was like, hang on, wait. So thank you for that. All right, sorry, I'm checking it over here. All right, at least one pun. Does anyone else, any other thoughts on that sort of same ideas? How does a romance story change with paranormal? I really like the idea of stakes, not intended. But are there any other things that sort of would make this inherently different from contemporary? Ignoring the fact that it obviously does include werewolves or something like that. But are there other things that would distinguish it from a contemporary?
I think, honestly, I mean, for me, one of the biggest things that I learned from like paranormal supernatural romance going into writing romance was just how much more varied the conflicts can be. External conflict comes a lot easier, it seems, in paranormal romance, just because you have a whole world of things that could possibly trying to kill a human main character, as opposed to just like, you know, these two people, you know, or if a second chance romance, even those stakes of like, you have this history with this person, that still becomes an entirely different relationship in a paranormal romance where like your lover's been reincarnated 3 times or something, you know, like it always kind of just amps up in that way, and you have so many more variations of the same conflict, so it gets a lot more interesting. Because, you know, you can take, you know, best friends to lovers and you've known each other 20 years, and then let's amp that up, you've known each other for 500 years, and you know, that's a very different connection and bond or relationship that's happening. And obviously, like what Britta said, you know, I wrote a book about a sleep paralysis demon and his immortal lover, like that, you know, a lot of the concepts I use in that book would not work in a contemporary romance, so they would feel really odd, right? So I think the world kind of opens up and gives you a lot more options for plots or the conflicts, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing, yeah, with like paranormal gang wars. Like those probably wouldn't really play, they're not going to play out the same way because a lot of the times like the stakes that we're talking about or the what's up for grabs is like somebody's soul or like very big worldly stakes, like the whole population's in peril now or whatever. Like it causes a lot more damage, so it has a bigger conflict regardless of what you choose.
Any other thoughts? I had a follow-up kind of on that, but if anyone has any other thoughts, Leanna?
I need the paranormal because I am writing 19th century women, and my 19th century women need the paranormal to circumvent societal restrictions. So I utilize the paranormal to be like, you know what? There's not an etiquette book on this. So we're just going to go and we're going to save the day. And then all of these friendly ghosts are going to help us along the way. And so the one through line between my fiction and my nonfiction is that everything has ghosts in it. So what the Haunted History of Invisible Women is about, actual ghosts in actual women's history. But in all of my fiction, with the exception of one contemporary romance, everything else is 19th century. I'm just obsessed with the time period and the conflicts of that time period and how women were trying to find their way around restrictions. And so for me, that paranormal aspect ends up empowering a lot of them through psychic means, because the spiritualists of the 19th century were on board with women's rights and suffrage. That's the actual history of the spiritualist movement, is hand in hand with the history of the suffrage movement, and with women being allowed to speak in public and trying to sort of like elevate positions and prominence in society. So all of that for me is absolutely both a historical thing I can track, and then also a really helpful way to talk about restrictions. And again, a lot of time, even if we're talking about history, we can also be talking about the parallels to our modern day.
And so I think for yours, for any of your heroines to have a ghost of a chance of freedom, they have to be ghosts. There you go. Pun number 2. Check. Okay.
There's gotta be ghosts.
Okay.
When I write myself against a wall, the ghosts go through it. It's very helpful for my plot holes.
I like that. So when RM a minute ago, you talked about, how second chance or best friends to lovers and how interesting that is. Are there any tropes that we hear about in romance that, well, first, probably just don't work in the paranormal world? Are there any? And I don't know that there are, but I leave that to you. Are there any that you're thinking, no, there's no way. There's no way we can make this? I mean, baseball, romance, but if they're all zombies, right? Is there something that we can't turn to a paranormal as a trope?
First and foremost, I believe in human creativity, and I always like a challenge. So I will be the last person to say that, because then I'll have myself sitting here like, how can I prove myself wrong? I think that is a question that comes up. I mean, it's come up a lot in like, especially me writing monster romance, even paranormal, supernatural romance, like whatever you call it, you always want to know how those bounds can be, pushed. So I don't know if there's like a singular trope that couldn't be done. There, you might need to do a lot of like pushing the boundary of the trope, but like I wouldn't be the one to say, yeah, we can't do this.
Anyone have any
So would
other
anybody
thoughts?
else?
Yeah. Is there something? Just no, absolutely would not ever see it in a paranormal. How dare you, Britta?
Well, I was going to kind of piggyback on something that RM just said about, to not say like I can't think of an absolute one, but that challenge and how do you utilize those tropes? Because I think like less overdone or like don't do this at all is more kind of being aware of how you are using tropes in paranormal romance and be aware of the risk of appropriation of cultures and histories and peoples. Because I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of big bag monster having some representation that might not be intended by the author, but when you read it, it's very problematic. It's very injurious. And so less avoiding a trope, but more so being aware of how you deploy those tropes and doing the history and speaking with people of different cultures to make sure that you're not deploying this in a way that is harming people.
Well, and I
And
think
that would be the same with like mental illness. Like there obviously all the plot, the holes that you can fall into with regular horror, paranormal stuff. And I did like write that down. Was basically the ableism, anti-indigenous sentiments, things like that. Like those are very easy to fall into, or have been easy to fall into for horror writers. If that's possible there, it's obviously possible in a romance of that nature, because you're still human and you're creating non-human things without thinking about the people, cultures, and illnesses or disorders, things like that that are already treated as subhuman or non-human.
well, and that was one of the other questions, and I know that we skipped around. I apologize for that, but that was one, is sort of tropes and cliches that are maybe problematic. And Britta, you and RM have both sort of touched on that. So I think one thing that I remember maybe reading about 80s and 90s, sort of the idea of werewolf lore, there was a concern about how that was perhaps representing the AIDS epidemic. And so I know that we see that with a lot of things now. So how do we avoid these problematic tropes like that? And again, I'm not saying that werewolves are still considered a representation of the AIDS epidemic, but I just I remember reading about that as one. I know we hear about a lot more now. But so what do we do as writers to try to avoid falling into that trap?
I'm a
A
big
lot of
believer in
research.
sensitivity readers.
Mhm.
I get a lot of them. As many as I can possibly think of, and if any of them spot something that I didn't even think of, I'll go get another person to look at it for that too. I think that even if you represent that identity, there's still ways that we can be missing something, and so it's really important to have those other eyes who are really good at looking through a critical lens and examining the work like that.
RM, you were
And I
gonna
also would swear, I would swear by sensitivity readers too. But one thing that does have to be taken into account is the limitations of putting the pressure of speaking for an entire group on one person or even two people.
They have
Um,
those warnings as well. Nobody can really represent the whole group.
but people all, we overlook that. You still get complaints or whatever because we've put that on one person. So I think that's why it's important still, even not coming from that group or whatever you're trying to write, research. It's really important. And it's also important too, is like, it's much easier to make sure you do not offend people you are in community with. So it is important to, be in community with people that if you're taking inspiration of any kind from. But there's also, different, like research, like you said, about werewolves. There's also other tropes that have gone unnoticed in mainstream media so long that it's lost, what its original meaning was. There's like a lot of anti-Semitic tropes that have been, overlooked because nobody realized what they were. Until you've seen them oversaturated in the mainstream, and it's hard to like pick those out. So it's something that we have to be really aware of when writing anything, because even if you are from a marginalized group, there are other marginalized groups, there are other people that have gone through different things, and especially too is like there are certain situations that can happen today that won't look the same to a certain group that they would look to another. So it's really easy to get caught in that. And it's really just like, sensitivity readers for sure. Even just to say like, I don't see the issue, or, I had multiple eyes on it and we discussed every possible issue. It's not foolproof, but at least you can say like you did the work to ensure that you safeguarded that or whatever you were writing.
any other
And
thoughts?
was it in the spirit of the paranormal, write that one down. That's a
Great.
back on the list. It's we're also writing in paranormal, and so to, as what's been said, is like stay with the community that you're writing within, learn and listen, have sensitivity readers. I don't know a single vampire sensitivity reader because I don't know a real vampire, but I think it when it comes to applying tropes or borrowing from real cultures in your work, ask yourself, where did maybe these ideas of vampirism, where lycanthropism, how ghosts are represented around the world, kind of look at why they are the way they are, why people speak of these paranormal cryptids and creepies and crawlies in the way that they do, and where that could have come from. Why is a vampire afraid of a cross? Anti-Semitism. That's the answer. Why can some ghosts walk over thresholds and others can't? And it's look at how you are using the paranormal creature and character. And if the answer is something that is problematic, maybe walk away, and that's a place where you can redevelop that to your own unique spin. Sparkly vampires being a very famous example of a repackaging of something we all knew. I don't know why she did sparkles, but it changed it in a way that opened up possibilities in paranormal romance with sparkly vampires that we didn't have before.
Thank you. I was actually that was not a question I was going to ask, but it was something I was thinking is how do I figure out as a writer, I'm writing my paranormal, there are no vampire sensitivity readers. There aren't werewolf sensitivity readers unless I personally can catch. And so I really like that idea, particularly coming from our researchers here that need to research and look into that.
Have something.
Yes, please, Brian.
Just one last little thought. So it's interesting that we're talking about this because I belong to a witchy book club and we're all witches. And one question we'll often ask, because we do one fiction book one month and one nonfiction book the other month. And on the fiction books, we're like, do you think this was written by a witch? Because there are some books, as witches, we kind of deal with that stereotype that we're devil worshippers when most of us don't even believe in the devil. So some of the literature that's out there just kind of puts that out to the world, that is what witches are. And so we don't really take offense to it. We just read. We love to read, and we're going to read anything. But we do definitely address that. This author was definitely not a witch because she would not have put that there,
Interesting. I like that. That's very cool. And that is something I don't know, in paranormal romance or maybe just paranormal. Now, maybe some people do think they're vampires, but in general, I would say we're pretty sure there aren't. But witches are real. There is a real, Wicca is a real thing. So as well, I think in different. So that's an interesting sort of tightrope that everyone has to walk when you are doing that. All right, we've talked about
good rule. I think one more thing, but I think a good rule. Obviously, I could say this on the tips question, but a good rule to live by is don't fall into the trap of believing you invented anything. Because obviously, when you're building in a paranormal world, you're assuming you're making all this up. But the reality is you pulled it from somewhere, likely. You know what I mean? Even if you're putting a bunch of little pieces together, you have to know where those little pieces came from, because otherwise you could be pulling from a place that you shouldn't be pulling from. This also happens in oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I thought that was a great point too, because it's not, can I find a vampire to sensitivity read my book? It's where, in what place and culture did it come from, this information that I'm gonna use, and let me get that checked.
Right, exactly, yeah. And it happens a lot, in monster romance, there are a lot of books that they take creatures from different cultures without reading what those creatures signify in that culture. And then it becomes this weird thing of well, you don't really know what it stands for or how it works in that culture, and you've taken it and kind of, made it into a romance hero or whatever, and it's kind of odd, the framing of it. So it's just one of those things. It's just because you found it on the internet, or you found, these pieces of it and you put it all together and gave it a fun name, we would still check all of those aspects to make sure we're not falling into the hole of like, oh, we took this from somewhere that we probably shouldn't have taken it from.
And that's really where nonfiction can be really helpful to be reading. Definitely looking in the research process, look at the nonfiction angle of something that you are a creature or an aspect that you are working with. There are all kinds of nonfiction books about the history of vampire lore and where it came from and how it differs from one culture to the next, because just about every culture has a vampire myth of some kind, and all of them are very specific, and all of them are often very loaded, sometimes with anti-Semitism or sometimes with other different socioeconomic factors. Also a misunderstanding through time of how decomposition of bodies work. All kind, how the vampire lore goes changes very much through time, and as we've learned through science what happens to a body. So I think that like always being willing to not just be aware of what's happening in your genre in fiction and being aware of what else is being published, but also really taking a moment and checking in on, okay, what's the nonfiction about these things, just so that in addition to sensitivity readers, which is critical, I employ them, I hire them for everything I do, that other angle of like of really doing the research to sort of see the backstory, because inevitably you're going to make your world richer because it's going to have information you can use in your world building. Plus you'll have a much richer context, and you will hopefully then not step right in to repeating the same harmful tropes that originated some of the stereotypes to begin with.
Any other thoughts on this? If not, I have another question, but I didn't want to. There's been some great conversation here. I didn't want to cut it off. Okay. Well, I love this, and I read something because I'm addicted to social media, like we all are. There were some jokes about there's nothing new, right? And someone was making a comment about how a reader asked what made her decide to make a Spriggan her paranormal romance lead, and she's like, I have no idea what that is, and she goes, looks, and oh look, yes, that is what she created. And so I think RM, mentioned it in all this, that we think we're creating something, we think we're doing something, and humans are very creative, but we also can be repetitive, I think. So we're talking about problematic, or problematic cliches, problematic tropes. I'm going to ask, are there tropes or cliches that are overdone? Just, my God, guys, stop writing these, please, everyone, folks. I don't want to, read any. Does anyone have any of that thought, or have you heard that in the paranormal romance field? Britta.
I will raise my hand because I wrote one and I tried to apply a spin. I'm so tired of shadow daddies.
Ah,
I love them, but like I feel like a lot of them are becoming shoehorned into a space, and coupled with this misunderstanding of what morally gray actually is. And I'm just like, I'm waiting for the twist. I wrote a cinnamon roll shadow daddy who has a very strong justice system, because I was like, I'm so tired of everything being the darklings. So that's mine. I'll throw it out there. I wrote one, and I'm tired. I'm ready for shadow mommy. Give me shadow mommy.
I like that. There we go. Any other? I will say, in the fantasy world, I hear about enemies to lovers all the time. I'm wondering if that's ever going to become overdone, or if it isn't. So paranormal romance, any other cliches that just, okay, folks, seriously, nothing else.
I can tell you what they say on Book Talk.
Oh, please.
Okay, I will tell you, I will love just about anything. I can get into anything, so nothing's off the table for me. But generally on Book Talk, I'm hearing a lot more, let's not do the love triangle, let's do why choose. They're tired of the love triangle and the picking. They want all.
I can get on board with that.
Yeah, I'm personally
I just don't like love triangles. Like, it's just very uncomfortable for me. I don't know, but I'm also, in my 30s now, so I don't know how I'm not gonna. If people still get that in YAs a lot, I get that, because you're a teenager. Of course, you're falling in love with multiple people. I'm not even gonna bash the kids for that one. Let them, work it out. But if they do one day work it out, and at 21 decide, yes, we could all be in a polyamorous relationship, bless them, right? So, not gonna knock them for that. But I am also a big proponent of nothing is overdone until BIPOC authors get a chance to do it. So I'm never gonna say that also is like I'm tired of this and that or whatever, because I haven't seen it done by a Black or Indigenous author yet, or that's something that I'm always looking for. That too is like I'm very much the person who, oh, you guys think that's overdone, let me add that to my list. You got it. So yeah, and I obviously, as somebody who's written, I have Greek myth series who constantly hears we're tired of Greek myth, and I'm sitting here like I've never seen a Black trans Hades and Persephone retelling until I did it, so I'm not tired of it yet because I haven't seen that yet, and I can't read my own book over and over again. I did that already. I'm tired of it. So it's one of those things where like I'm over here doing this not just because, oh, this is the book I wanted to read, but also because I wanted to tell y'all keep writing it. I haven't gotten my fill yet. So it's definitely one of those things where like, yeah, there are obviously tropes if you're doing them the same exact way every single time. And that does tend to happen with traditional publishing because they have this formula that they go by, and very rarely do they want to step out of those bounds. It's very scary for them. But I, am an indie author. I came from India. I self-pubbed my first book, didn't even look trad pub's way, just said I want to do it and I want to do it now. And I did it and it worked out. So I'm a very big proponent of one, if you want to do it, do it. Two, if you want to do it and trad pub is telling you not to do it, you come to us in self pub and indie, and we will get you where you need to go.
I am motivated by spite, so I do appreciate that that's part of it. Is, oh, you think it's overdone? Well,
Absolutely.
come on. I like that. Mariah, do you have any thoughts? I saw you nodding earlier, kind of along. Do you have any thoughts on this, tropes that are overdone, or maybe nothing's overdone, as RM says?
Usually nothing's overdone for me because I read across the board. Like I love to read everything. Horror and fantasy is obviously my favorite, but if the only thing I get a little bored with is nonfiction, and I need to read it, but I just want to escape. But I will say, when I was on bed rest with my pregnancy, I read a lot of young adult, more traditionally published, and I got so sick of the little baby love triangles. But for the most part, it doesn't bother me. There's a little bit of a love triangle in the Pines. But that one actually isn't like my biggest paranormal fan or romance. Sorry. My young adult series is. And there's no love triangles in there. So it's safe.
Well, I do really like that idea of particularly as we age as readers too. I really like RM, when you're young, yes, you have plenty of time to date all these people. When you're older, I don't, besides
I'm just tired. I'm barely taking care of myself. So we're not doing love triangles. If you have somebody else you want to go spend your time with, I'm going to sleep. And I wish you all the best.
Leanna, I think you wanted to say something.
As everyone's saying, everybody's got something to say. Everyone is going to do, even with the same tropes, everyone's going to write a different story. So I don't really think anything's off the table. What I do get tired of is authors who want romance money, but they don't want to say that they're romance authors. And so they're like, can I write a romance but not have a happy ending? No, you cannot. You do not get to like catfish romance readers with sort of something that you think is like more highbrow literary or something, and sort of talk down to romance readers and romance writers. That I see authors do a lot. And my first book came out traditionally published in 2009, a mass market paperback, The Strange and Beautiful Tale of Miss Percy Parker. And it was shelved in romance, but it's very much a cross genre fantasy romance. It was romantasy. That's been around for a lot longer than that term has been around. It's been around since pretty much the beginning of fantasy, really. And I do see people wanting to kind of step their toe towards romance, but not really embrace it fully. And I do really think the only thing you really have to do in a romance is you do have to have a happy ending. There have to be two people. It can be a happily for now, but two people have to have have to have some kind of connection. And what that means can be really, really wide open. It does not necessarily have to be physical. So there's a huge range of what that can mean, but it does have to mean that there is a consensual, caring, emotional connection between two people or two entities or two beings of some kind. And I think the concept of, okay, well, can an author do all of these romance tropes, but then, oh, surprise, everybody dies at the end? Well, that is a different genre. And so in that regard, that's just the thing that gets that is people trying to sort of denigrate romance while trying to kind of get the romance readership on board because it is a best-selling genre. That's my little rant.
I love it. I think that really takes us kind of back to one of the first questions that I asked, which is about conventions, and I think that I'd ask more. So these crucial aspects, paranormal, but it is a romance. So what do we require to make this to write what we would consider a genre paranormal romance? So Leanna tells us, and I everything that I see, I would probably agree. If it's a romance, it has to have some happily ever after or happily for now, but otherwise it's just a love story maybe. But are there other conventions? Like, yes, if you really want to fit, if you want to get in this genre, if you want to be part of this, and as Leanna says, not take the romance money by not doing the genre work. What are other conventions that writers that are listening would need to have?
I think one thing I had to learn to balance coming into the romance genre, and I agree, it's, the happily ever after, that's the first thing you get told when you come into a romance space wanting to be a romance author. I don't know why we every month have somebody trying to argue that, but it's it's the first thing they tell you, and sometimes it's the only thing they tell you, and then obviously two or more people, it could be polyamorous, and you can have different, like, each person, even in that polyamorous relationship, can have different relationships to each other. But at the end of the day, if it is a polyamorous relationship, that happy ending has to be happy for everybody involved. So I think that was something really important, is like, you don't obviously want a happy ending for one person and the other person's just like, oh, well, as long as you're happy, I guess I could do this, right? So the together, it has to be a cohesive happy ending. But I think when I started writing in the genre, it's also important to kind of find a balance between the couple getting stronger and also the characters getting stronger, because obviously you want to see characters get better through that relationship, but not by saying that love fixes everything, like it can cure mental illness and things that, like, you want to have a realistic happy ending even in paranormal romance or whatever. Like, you don't want them to be in love because of a love potion or something like that. Like, it still has to be like Leanna said, consensual, and also just like legitimately happy. Like, you want them to be together and want to be together. And you can also have a happy for now. That's also an exception of, like, we are happy right now, because nobody can see the future, tell the future, whatever. You might hate this person in 20 years, or fall out and have different views, goals, etc., and that's realistic. I think a lot of people accept that because we understand you don't know if forever is forever, but right now I want it to be forever, and that's enough. And that's also a realistic goal, and it's a much better, I think, lesson to teach younger readers than you are stuck with this person that you went on an adventure with at 21 and fell in love with. You now have to be with this person forever, instead of, right now we are very, very happy and that's enough. And I think that we've gotten to a place where the happy for nows are a lot more wide variety. We see a lot more of them, so that you have that message of, like, right now is enough. Let that be enough. It's okay. But I mean, other than that, I think we've come a long way from what we expected romance to be. I know when I was younger, what romance was, I didn't see myself in it at all, for one. There weren't a lot of Black romance authors that were available to me or that I had access to. There weren't any indigenous authors that I could think of that were writing romance that I could go to and say, this is what it's supposed to look like. But we've come a long way from that. There definitely wasn't, queer, trans, two-spirit romances that, I could go to and say, well, this is me, or this is how I see myself. And it would have helped a lot, but it didn't. So we didn't have that. And now, we have all of this, and it's becoming more mainstream and accepted and accessible to, globally, not just, the English speaking, book world, but, globally it's becoming more widespread. But it's just like, we still have a long way to go. So conventions for romance seem to be very loose, and we don't ask for a lot, just a happy ever after and a central relationship. But beyond that, yeah, there's so much you can do, so much with romance, and you can write it in any genre, like, you can do so much. I just don't know why people don't want to, I don't want to admit I'm a romance author. Well, then don't go write something else. But we're not here to make you feel comfortable. I'm not about to say, yeah, this age-old genre that's been doing what it's been doing for before you were born should definitely change its conventions for you so you can get $1 million. No, like, that's not how it works. So I definitely think we're not asking for a lot as far as conventions go. I don't think there's as many conventions in romance as there is in other genres. And those aren't bad. Obviously, you're just looking at, it's a different genre. It works differently. So for romance, though, we're not asking a lot. It is not asked a lot of me at all. So I appreciate that.
Britta, I am dying to hear, if that's barely even a pun. I'm dying to hear from you on what do you think of I'm trying. I should have looked this up beforehand. What do you think are some other conventions? Do you have anything to add to what Leanna and Ariana
said? Just a little bit more, because I think kind of, how can I don't know if I can have a pun off the cuff for this one, but to circle back to what Leanna said at the start of this about the percentages, I feel in paranormal romance, there's an aspect to play with those percentages a little bit by adding in the third aspect of the world, because a romance is about the journey your characters are taking within themselves and together. To kind of tie back into what RN said, is we don't want to say like love is the answer just because. Love was the answer because these two characters healed something in each other by a reflection. Not to say that someone was like, I'm here, now you're better, but my strength or behavior in a circumstance surrounding a weakness that you had gave you an opportunity of self-reflection and growth. So it's not a gift they're giving, but it's an example someone can tie to. So that's that romantic journey and character journey, and they grow up and together. So that's like the big romance portion. But then relating that to the world around them, having the external plot and the world that they exist in act as a mirror to their own self-growth and journey. Enemies to lovers being a famous one. I have to marry this werewolf and I hate werewolves, but he's actually pretty decent and takes care of his family and does volunteer hours, and I work a corporate job and I go home and I don't do anything. Like, I have to look at myself and see where my pitfalls are, where I'm falling short, and where I can grow, because I'm seeing that my notion of the world I exist in that's paranormal and this person that I am now tied to is actually a better person than I am. Like, they are a better being. So I think within paranormal, and like small town is a great opportunity for this, because you can, in Cinderella's story, is like the billionaire romances kind of play with that, with he's the mean billionaire, but actually like he's got kids and he's like a really hands-on dad. Or yeah, she's a grumpy like business lady, but at home she really loves knitting and has 18 cats, and they're the happiest cats in the world. And it's like, when you get that vision but apply the filter of paranormal on it, it's a fun convention to take those percentages into thirds and create a really rich story around it.
Well, I will say, I love, as someone who is happily married but does also have 3 cats, I love the idea of some kind of romance with a cat lady, and maybe an actual cat girl lady, perhaps. Are there any other sort of conventions or just aspects that you're telling someone who's just getting into this field, who's just stepping a toe away from regular romance, or maybe just away from paranormal, and wants to do to join this up. Is there anything you might tell them as, hey, you need to include this, make sure this is in there?
I just wanted to say something else real quick about something that Britta said, because it did jog my thought about, because we talked earlier about like tropes or aspects that we shouldn't be doing, or like, you know, like ableism and, you know, cultural appropriation, stuff like that. And then we did also talk about like enemies to lovers, it being done a lot. And I think something that's not related to young authors who want to do enemies to lovers because it's such a hot trope is what happens often that makes it bad is just it becomes a colonial romance, or like a
Oh my gosh, yeah.
oppressor and oppressed romance, and you never break down the systems that the oppression comes from, so you kind of treat the lover as they redeem the entire system or empire or whatever, and that's not really how it works. So I think one of the big things to focus on when if writing that is enemies to lovers can be done without it being you know, I no longer believe in this oppressive regime that I've helped build because I fell in love with, you know, a commoner girl or a, you know, whatever. And that's always really uncomfortable because, and then there are people obviously that just outright write Nazi romances and KKK romances. And then people think that they're not that bad because they're writing it in fantasy or paranormal romance and make it into, you know, allegories for race among like elves and whatever else. And it's like, no, it's still uncomfortable. Doing race science with, you know, creatures is actually kind of feels worse in a lot of ways, right? Because now you're just like, well, you're equating struggles that Black, Indigenous, you know, and other POC go through with monsters and the treatment that they're getting, but don't actually sympathize with those groups in real life. So then it becomes very weird and uncomfortable. And I think that's something that should be talked about more, is just how easy it is to fall in this thing of like, oh, we're enemies, which means we have to be oppressor and oppressed, as opposed to like, I don't know, like you're from two rival witch covens and you don't like each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they have to be equals, I feel like, at the very least. Even if you're, you know, enemies, you can still be equals. It doesn't have to be like this systemic, you know, marginalized class and then like a supremacist, right? Like that's what it feels like. So I feel like that's something to really look out for.
Yeah, it's such a good point about the power dynamics. Like, examine the power dynamics within your story.
Yes.
And make sure that you are not just doubling down on already oppressive things. If there is a way in which you're doing that, then examine it critically in your work. Don't just sort of replace history's problems and just sort of say, oh, okay, we're going to just repeat the same issues and not examine them. I think that's where it's you're just using a trope or a stereotype and you're not doing anything new with it. You're just continuing to harm people. My whole aim is harm no other, write what you will, to sort of take a Wiccan phrase there. It's just that, but the harm no other really is at the core, for me, is at the front. And I am a big I'm a big believer in consent in all kinds of situations of romance of any kind of emotional consent, physical consent, intimacy, all of that kind of stuff. Romance as a genre has gotten so much better about really forward centering consent, and that's just I will always insist on that as a reader and as a writer.
Well, to finish this up, because I want to make sure we do have time for questions for those of you who will be able to be there on the date. Are there any tips that you would give paranormal romance writers? RM gave us one already, but Mariah, I'd like to start with you, and I'm just going to go on my own gallery view. Mariah, can you tell us, are there any tips that you'd give paranormal romance writers listening to this today?
I think whatever genre you're in, it is very imperative to be reading in your genre. So I read everything because I kind of write everything. But definitely, if you want to be a romance writer, just get out there, read indie, read traditional, read everything. And everything that's been discussed is really important. I think staying current with the issues and everything, and the sensitivity readers, all of that is really important in this day and age for sure. Read.
Yeah. Leanna, what about you? Any tips for paranormal romance writers?
I think just also be in community if at all possible. Not only will that help you understand what's happening in the genre, it will also and make sure that community is diverse, because then if you're listening to other people and they're talking about their concerns, you will be a more nuanced writer for having a wide range of people that you are listening to and that you are learning from. Just really not only read diversely, try to be in the world diversely as possible, because you will, and you, none of the relationships that you have will go wasted. None of that is a waste of time. All of it is enriching you as a person.
Britta, any tips? What about you? Any tips?
I'll go with like a craft tip around the write what you know kind of as the main blanket. Setting and description of setting are crucial to rich world building and your story. And so use that in your writing. Don't let your characters wear their place like a coat. Put them in the coat. Put their hands in the pockets. Let them feel the fleece lining and the scratchy thread. Don't just say, we are in New Orleans because it is paranormal. Research the city, read nonfiction about New Orleans. Get there if you can. Google tour it on maps if you can't. But use your place instead of just having it just be kind of stickered on the front. Get in there, get gritty. If you are writing, there's a very good urban fantasy series in Vegas, and you feel the dirt between this character's toes, you feel the burn in his eyes from the neon lights, and you don't have to have been there to be there. You can research this stuff, watch movies, read across the board, but use your description to help with what I was saying earlier with that other percentage of the world that mirrors and reflects what your characters are going through.
Awesome. Robin, how about you? Tips for paranormal
Oh,
romance writers?
I'd like to do a craft one too, but with character development, my preference as a reader, so I hope that people do this as writers, is to consider each of those characters that are in that love story as their own story, so that we have two people who exist, and then when they come together, it's not like they exist only for each other, but that when they decide to live for each other, it's because they each have their own lives that happen to weave well together. So I think what someone once told me, if you can plot it from one character's perspective, you can also plot it from another character's perspective, and the world is going to get deeper, those characters' relationships are going to get deeper, and their motivations are going to be strong, because you know that they're going to act differently to each of those situations. And I just love that tip.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. RM, finish us off. Tips. You gave us one earlier you mentioned, but if you have any others.
Honestly, just in general, write what you love. Write what you're passionate about. Don't write for the money. Don't write to what you think the general population wants. Because you'll get burnt out really fast trying to chase a trend, or doing what you think other people want you to do, or what you're supposed to do at this stage in your career, or your first book, etc., etc. Your first book is supposed to be your worst book. As soon as we get to that mentally, we're going to be much better off. I cheated. I did re-edit my first book 3 years later, but again, self-pub, so I could do that. But we don't always get that opportunity, and that is okay, because it's your first book. You learn from it, you grow from every single draft that you write. Don't ever let yourself believe that, like, oh my God, my first book was a tank. I'm never going to be able to do this again. Like, you're going to learn something else, not just from writing the book, but the editing, or the researching, or the promo, all of that, the community that you make along the way, etc., etc. You just have to trust the process. I know you probably hear that a lot, and it sucks sometimes, but really the first book is not the end of it. I literally, my first book didn't hear. I released it, and it was so quiet for months and months, and then somebody picked it up that had a big following, and it worked out. And a lot of it is luck. I'll be the first one to say a lot of it is luck. Writing a book about a sleep paralysis demon, it became a bestseller. Did I think it was going to be a bestseller? No. I was really not all that invested in that project, and that because of that, I mean, I was invested, but I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself because I was like, this is the most bonkers thing I could have written. Like, who's gonna, read this? And then a bunch of people read it and it worked out. So truly just write what you want, get funny with it, get wild with it, get creative. And I guarantee you, you will find the readership that you're looking for.
Awesome. Well, thank you all to our panelists. I want to finish this up just because although this is not a marketing panel, this is my third year moderating the marketing one. And so I know this is my call to action. I want to know where our listeners can find you. And if you've got a new book coming or something just out, I'd love to hear it. Robin, I'd love to start with you. Where can we find your work? What do you got coming up?
My book recently went down everywhere, but it's on Amazon right now. So Amazon. And then I have a book coming out later this year with Owl Crate. It's an anthology called Monsters and Masquerade.
Awesome. Britta, where can we find you? What do you got coming up, or what do you want to pitch?
I'm on Amazon, Kindle, and KU. I'm hoping to pivot to direct sales at the end of the year. And then at the time this airs, I will have just released a sapphic monster romance that will be on Amazon, Kindle KU, and White on paperback.
Mariah, where can we find you? What do you got? Or, tell us if we want to learn more about you and read your books.
You can find me. I'm on social media. You can look me up on my website. My books, In the Pines, is available now. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere books are sold online. And my young adult series, The Lost Irwine, actually comes out next month. And same thing. You'll be able to find it paperback, digital, pretty much anywhere online.
Awesome. RM, because you've been last a couple times recently. RM, sorry, Leanna. RM, tell us, where can we find you? What do you got coming up?
So you can find me at rmvirtues.com. I'm also on Patreon/rmvirtues. When this airs, I think it'll be the second day of my Kickstarter with Bonkers Romance, Katie Robert and Jenny Nordbeck. We're doing it's the Black Rose auction. It is Paranormal Romance. Mine is. And so it's actually kind of a sequel to my sleep paralysis demon book, Sing Me to Sleep, which is also on KU right now. And then it's the next book in that series the first chapter will be in the book, which is Pin Me to the Wall by My Longing. And that'll be out in like winter. But Kickstarter will be June 6th. That's when it goes into effect. There's going to be a bunch of swag you can only get during this Kickstarter. And my ebook, which is Divine Intervention, it is an angel, 2 witches, and then my sleep paralysis demons are guest starring. So they're all on a mission to get back a very special chalice from the Vatican at an auction. And there's going to be some, wild stuff going on. So I definitely think that it would be good to pick it up. And there's 5 other books with it that are all taking place at this auction. So it's going to be a fun time.
All right, Leanna, tell us, where can we find you and what have you got coming up you can do nonfiction, but I want to hear about your paranormal, like your paranormal chops here.
All of the wherever books are sold, you can look up my name. I do have on my website, I do have a where do you start with Leanna's books, and it sort of gives you my different series and what taste you might have. For specifically paranormal romance, I will say Strange and Beautiful. I don't even know if this is coming up.
Almost did. Okay,
well, but there we go. Strange and Beautiful. Strange and Beautiful is a paranormal romance. This was won a bunch of fantasy romance awards when it came out. This was the one that I had talked about as my debut. I did get a chance to go back and re-edit it when Tor got the rights after my first publisher had gone belly up. So this is the revised edition. So this one definitely is paranormal romance, and as is The Spectral City. So the Spectral City books are also paranormal romance. And then everand.com does a lot of original fiction. And so I have several paranormal romance works through them. The Spirit Suitor Chronicles, there's a trilogy of novellas starring a ghost and the exorcist that she possesses. They fall in love. And so it was a great, really fun meet cute of possession, which was a delightful thing to deal with. And that's a follow-on from the Spectral City series. So it's same characters. And then forthcoming later this year, I'll have a fantasy romance that has magic and paranormal elements in it, called Blackthorn and Amberfire. And that will also be out at everand.com in digital and audio, with me doing the audiobooks. So you will hear me narrate. My professional theater background comes in handy when I get to narrate my audiobooks. So I'm really grateful to Everand for that. And they will be available on Audible.
Awesome. Well, that is very cool. Well, thank you all. I think this has been a fantastic panel. So I know this is absolutely fantastic for those listeners. We do have this. We've done similar panels in the past. I was not monitoring, so I don't know who the panelists were, but so I can't say that this isn't the best panel, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the best one. But we have the Rules of Romance, a genre masterclass from 2023, and Just Roommates: Writing Queer Romance from 2022. Some of these may be able to stick around for a little bit to do some additional questions. But other than that, thank you all so much, and we will see you in June.